Hello and welcome. I'm doing an interview today with someone that I have a lot of admiration for, Jake Boyle. Jake and I met at a Thrive Beyond Mormonism conference in June of last year. And I just was excited about where he was going with his life, and he has since then taken off into a new adventure. And I'm always curious about people who are able to just make that huge transition, and what are the things that help them to move forward. And so I'm excited to get to know Jake and kind of hear what his strategies are. So first of all, Jake, what is it you do? You're in Scottsdale, aren't you, right now?
I'm in Scottsdale right now, yeah. And I know due to COVID, it feels like it was much longer ago, but it was actually just February of this year that you and I met at the Threat Conference. Yeah, it was the Mesa one.
Yeah, it feels like it was a year. It feels like it was June or something.
I know it feels forever ago, but it wasn't. It was just February this year, and it was, I don't know, it was life changing, that event. And so I appreciate everybody who helped put it on. I know Marcy was a big part of that, and you were part of it, and many others, and so it was incredible. But as far as right now, what I'm doing is I'm kind of a vagabond. Moving from place to place and doing whatever I want. I sold my house and sold my car and bought a van, and I'm just kind of living on the road and taking my kids as much as possible and just living.
Yeah, just doing one day at a time.
Yeah.
What are you trained in, or your field of work?
So prior to this, I was a finance director for a public school district. I was born and raised in St. John's, Arizona, and then I came down here and went to school and did the mission. And then following that, a little stint down here working for Vanguard, I moved back to St. John's and became finance director of St. John's Public Schools, and then moved to Holbrook and was finance director there for 6 years. And that's my most recent employment. I left Holbrook in June of this year.
Okay, yeah, so we have some similar stomping grounds, because I was raised in Sholo. So we played both St. John's and Holbrook were in our sports grouping. So I'm familiar with those areas.
Sholo was our local Walmart.
Yeah, we had the Walmart. I think we were the first to get McDonald's too.
Yeah, right.
Just moving up in the world. But there's a lot of members in both St. John's and Sholo area. It's really densely LDS. So we probably have similar experiences with our small town Mormonism in the Arizona flavor.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Jake, tell us a little bit about your story, about how you grew up and what caused you to transition and to where you are today.
So, like you said, St. John's is densely populated, LDS, Mormon. I kind of grew up in a non-traditional family, just a little bit. My dad has pioneer stock, although he's been inactive since he was a teenager. And then my mom is a convert. She joined the church probably when I was about 7 or 8 years old, and then wasn't terribly active. She's now active now, but I grew up, in the beginning, it was primary teachers and Sunday school teachers and neighbors and friends that were taking me to church on a regular basis from the time I was young. I got baptized just before my 9th birthday, so I just barely missed the cusp of being a convert baptism. But I attended church with friends and family, or friends primarily, and then probably about the time I turned 12, right, when you get the priesthood and additional responsibility placed on you, I really took it much more seriously, probably more seriously than anybody else in my family. I was very, very strict in my adherence to going to church and wanting to be at all the activities and do everything that I was supposed to do. I know later when I turned 16, I got my first job at the local grocery store. It was the only grocery store in town. And there were, on occasion, that we had to work Sundays, right? Even though we were LDS, and the manager was LDS, and he understood that, but they were open Sundays. I remember one time my dad calling me at the store and saying, "Can you bring home some ground beef?" And I said, "No, you can't shop on Sundays," right?
I can work on Sunday, but you can't shop on Sunday.
So I was strict, but also, I guess, not very strict. And so that's kind of the environment I grew up in. Young Men's was huge for me, and the leadership that I had there was really impactful for me. I looked up to all of my young men leaders of bishopric, and so they played a pivotal role in kind of instilling all the important Mormon doctrine in me, and the culture and the rules and all of that. So I grew up like that, and then I left for a year of college, and then I came back and went on a mission. I went to Caracas, Venezuela, and served in Venezuela for 2 years. I did a small stint in Texas, waiting for my visa, but then got down to Venezuela, served in Venezuela. Absolutely loved my mission. The mission was phenomenal. It was really great. I was an obedient missionary, but I was also one that kind of bucked the system a little bit when they fought for baptisms for just numbers' sake. I was one who said, no, I don't think it's right. I don't think this person's ready. And I bucked the system just a little bit. And so the mission was great. Came back, met my wife through a mutual friend, through a mission friend, actually, somebody that she had served her mission with and that I was in a singles adult board with. Met and married in 2006. We met in June. We're married by November. And then started doing the Mormon thing, right? Popping out kids. And so we had four.
Get to work.
And so we wasted no time in that regard. And we had 4 kids in a short period of time. Right now, they're my youngest is 7 years old. My oldest is 12. So in a period of 5 years, had 4 kids, boy, girl. Absolutely love them. They're the biggest and best thing in my life. And life seemed to be pretty good, right? We were living the Mormon dream, and then kind of had a crisis moment. I don't know if you want me to segue right into that, or if there's
go right into it. Yeah.
So there's multiple kind of steps and caveats that occurred in me losing my faith, but probably the first to put a lot of weight on my shelf was the essays. Somebody shared the essays on Facebook. I hadn't heard of them. I think the essays started coming out in about 2013. It was about 2015 that I first encountered them, and I read them. I was either executive secretary or clerk at the time, but I was in the bishopric and attending bishopric meetings. I remember raising the questions in some of the bishopric meetings, and even one of the bishopric members taught a 5th Sunday lesson on race in the priesthood essay, and that was very controversial, and he was kind of shut down not to do that. And I was asking the questions and kind of in defense or whatever. And I remember talking to my father-in-law. We went on a vacation to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and while we were there, and I kind of broke off with my father-in-law, and I was asking him some questions about the Book of Mormon and the anachronisms and issues in it. And he tried his best, but he didn't have a lot to justify it, right? He says, I understand there may be some issues with the Book of Mormon, but I just look past those issues, right? I just look past them, and I
That's when we
focus
have
on
to exercise faith, right?
Yeah. And so he tried, but to no avail. And so I continued having more and more doubts, but I was still active. I was very committed to the church, still, and to my family. And then my wife and I were called to serve on the Pioneer Trek at the stake level. And so they were doing a tri-stake Pioneer Trek with Winslow, Holbrook, and Gallup, New Mexico stake. And my wife and I were in charge of Holbrook stake, and then there was another couple in charge of the other 2 stakes, right? And so the 6 of us total were in charge of running the entire Pioneer Trek. And all the planning came to fruition, and then we went out there. And the first day of the trek, my wife was involved in an ATV accident. She was on a 4-wheeler that she borrowed from somebody else that was on the trek that had provided them. She was on an ATV and had an accident. Nobody witnessed the accident, so we don't know what happened to this day. We don't know what happened, but she fractured her skull. She sustained a traumatic brain injury. She broke 5 ribs. She ruptured 2 eardrums.
Wow.
She was life flighted from the middle of the desert, in the middle of nowhere, to Flagstaff Medical Center, where she underwent surgery and weeks of rehab and months of unemployment. And that was really a tragic event for our family. It was very difficult. And the church's response was less than ideal. The local members, our friends, were phenomenal, right? And they did bake sales, and they auctioned a rifle, and they watched our kids, and they, because it was months that we were dealing with this. But the church itself, the Salt Lake Center-based church and the insurance company, they were rejecting claims. I guess there's church activity medical assistance, comma is what it's called, and it's supposed to cover some of the expenses, the out-of-pocket expenses. But they continue to deny expense after expense after expense. We were in collections with hospitals and with different ambulance companies, and it was a nightmare. And when we went locally to ask for help, because they said to submit everything to Salt Lake City, and then whatever doesn't get paid, you can go to your bishop and ask for assistance that way. At one point, I was told I should sell a car. Right? Said your wife. Yeah, she said I was told your wife doesn't work anymore. You don't need 2 vehicles. Why not sell a vehicle and make do? Right? And we own both of our vehicles, so we were responsible about debt. We just hadn't planned for a traumatic experience like this, right? And so
Right.
we never went back to the bishop after that. Or we did one other time. I just submitted a bill and said we need this paid, and I didn't meet with him. I didn't talk to him. And I don't fault him. He tried, he's a great guy also, and so I don't want to disparage the bishop, but Salt Lake City should have handled it. The bishop shouldn't have handled it, in my opinion. And so that was a very bad and terrible experience. And from that, I was encouraged by a family member to look for an attorney. And if the church is going to be difficult about it, get an attorney and we weren't looking to make millions, right? We were just looking to not lose our house. We borrowed $12,000
prevent financial ruin. Yes. Oh.
And so and that's all we were looking for, right? Is just the assistance that we were promised. And so I started looking for attorneys, and attorney after attorney after attorney kept turning the case down, said it's not strong enough. Nobody witnessed the accident. She was the driver of the ATV. How is the church at fault, right? They told me I should go after the owner of the ATV, which I contacted him about his insurance, and the ATVs weren't insured, right? And so for me to sue him, I'd be suing him personally, and I couldn't do that. And so anyway, through the process of looking for attorneys, I spoke with one attorney who said, I've sued the church before, and it nearly broke me. I nearly lost my practice. He said, and I quote, right, I would rather sue the Taliban before going after the church again. And so I was very discouraged. I gave up that process. But in the process, I met and I spoke with Mark, I think it's Hogel, the guy who owns the quitmormon.com, the attorney.
Oh, yeah.
And so I started finding these stories, and I found more and more people who had gone through similar experiences. There was a woman in Oklahoma who died on the Pioneer Trek, died 2 years prior to us, and left 2 kids and a husband. And so I wasn't alone. There's a guy in New York that hurt his back on an activity and is now disabled. I started finding all these stories, and I found the ex-Mormon subreddit. I wasn't even on Reddit. I didn't even know Reddit existed. But I found the ex-Mormon subreddit where lots of people were sharing their stories and their frustrations in many different areas of the church. But for me, the ex-Mormon subreddit, what it represented for me was a community that I didn't know existed, right? I had all these doubts, and I had all these concerns, and I had all these issues, but in my mind, you were either Mormon, didn't know you were going to be Mormon, or you were less active Mormon, right? Like there was no.
Or you were in outer darkness because you are an apostate.
Yeah, there was no more ex-Mormon and happy, right? I never saw that modeled. I never witnessed it. I never, in the church and all of my upbringing, it was people who leave the church are unhappy, and there is no happiness outside of the church, and you're giving up so much by leaving the church. And so I didn't even know that a community existed, right? And that people were thriving beyond Mormonism, right? And every now and again on the subreddit, there'd be the selfie train, right? Where people post it, and these people were happy. And granted, it's social media, right? And everybody looks happy on social media, but these people are real people, right? They're real and happy people, and they've moved on post-Mormonism. And so I recognized that there were people out there that could leave the church and still be very happy. And so I went down the rabbit hole, right? And I read the CES letter. I listened to a lot of the Mormon Stories podcast, Radio Free Mormon podcast. I went in both feet and just dug in and researched as best I could. And I remember I remember the day that I concluded that the church wasn't true, and my whole, like the entire universe crashed on top of me, right? And I remember being out in the middle of the street, pacing a like a four-way stop, and I was just pacing this intersection, and it was very much like the Truman Show when he hits the side, right? Realizes that it's all fake.
Get the
My,
edge, yes.
my whole world, my universe, like I said, I was questioning whether the stars were real. I was questioning whether I was real. I like everything, right? Because
Yes.
all my decisions at that point was based on the church being true.
Yes.
And everything I'd done. And we're going to get to a big decision that I made,
Well, before
right?
we move on here, because this is a really important piece here, I want to point out that you didn't leave the church because you were offended because how the church handled your financial situation. At that point, you were still all in. It's just that that was a window to where you started to question. And it's not even the question that causes you to leave. It's actually when you start doing the research, and you start to piece things together based on one question that allows you to even go into that exploration, and that is something's not right here. What was the question that you think, because the question's different for everybody, but what was the question that you were asking right before you went down that, what you call the rabbit hole?
How are all of these people happy post-Mormonism, right? Like
Okay.
I hadn't even started the research until, I found that community first. I found that so many, because to me, they didn't exist, right? People who leave the church are unhappy and they're miserable and there's no joy in their lives, and they're drug addicted, and they're
Prostitutes, and they turn
yeah,
into bums on the street.
yeah, right. And
And
so
that's where the cognitive dissonance was, where you were told this and you're seeing this, and that's when you start allowing yourself to ask more relevant questions. Would you say that's
yeah,
how it happened?
yeah, absolutely. And there's incredibly smart and bright people that are concluding that the church isn't true, right? And um, I was always taught that if you're wavering in your testimony, you rely on somebody else's testimony. And I can think of the people in my life that I look at that are attorneys, right, or they're doctors, or they're these big, smart, educated people, right? And I relied heavily on their testimonies on those moments when I was wavering, right?
Yes.
But then to see that there's smart people, there's attorneys and doctors and psychology, and whatever, right? Very educated people that also leave the church, right? And they conclude that it's not true. And there's people of all walks of life that come into the church, and there's people of all walks of life that leave the church and they're not miserable, right? They're very happy, and they came to the same
Exactly.
conclusion. And so like I said, that was kind of the catalyst that opened, like, they can leave and they can be happy. What is it that, why is it that they left, right? And so
Yeah.
that's when I started researching and looking into it. And they left for very valid reasons. Just like you said, it's not because they wanted to sin. It's not because they weren't strong enough or their
They're
testimonies were weak.
offended, or yeah.
Yeah, they discovered additional truth and they acted upon it, right?
Yeah.
Which is what you should be expected to do.
Yeah. And you
You know,
should
we
be able to do it that and be able to leave and have your dignity intact if you're in a healthy
yeah.
religion.
Well, and we applaud people that leave their lives to come to Mormonism, right? They maybe leave a family behind, or a church behind, or a culture or a community, and they join our church, right? Um, why can't we be more accepting of people leaving the church also, right? And doing the exact same thing that we're pulling people into the church by doing.
Yes, I would agree.
So
So what happened when you had this moment that everything's crashing down around you? Did you tell your wife? How did you handle that?
well, and again, the accident happened in June, right? And then she was dealing with depression. She had a TBI. Her life hasn't been the same, right? And so I was protecting her, at least I thought, from a lot of it, right? And so I wasn't telling her. I couldn't add this worry to everything else that she was worried about, right? She was still unemployed. We were facing financial issues and whatnot, and so I kept it a secret from her, and I just kind of suffered in silence for the most part. I did have one friend that I confided in a lot, and I do feel bad because I feel like I'm in part the reason why he left the church. And I don't want anybody saying I was a true believer until I met Jake and Jake told me about this, right? Like my goal is
Right.
not to have a bunch of people leave the church, although
Mine
I would
either.
be happy if they did, right? Um, and so I feel bad about that, but I confided in him. And so it was actually Thanksgiving 2 years ago that I was talking to my father-in-law, and I was talking specifically about the changes in the temple in 1990, right? Because I had read and discovered that, and I didn't know about it. And so I was asking him, and he was in doubt prior to 1990. And so he confirmed for me that yes, there were changes. And that was mind blowing for me, right? Because the temple ordinances were restored by Jesus, right? Like
Right.
why are they changing over time? And so um, he again attempted to give me some consolation, and it just wasn't getting me anywhere. And so it was during that conversation at Thanksgiving, just after Thanksgiving in his backyard, that my wife came up behind me and she overheard me talking, and the cat was out of the bag at that point. So I told her, and it created a very tense moment, right, for the next little while. But I continued to attend church for almost a year after that, right? I wasn't eager to leave the church in my childhood, right? I wasn't eager to just throw it all away. I I wanted to give it the best benefit of the doubt, right? And
We
so I
want it to
continued
be
to,
true. We
yeah,
do.
absolutely.
It would be
And
easier if it was true.
yeah, and because you built so much of your life around it, right?
Yeah.
And so it absolutely would be easier if it was true. And so I I continued to attend, and I just made small changes over time. And so again, that was November that I told her. March or no, February, we were on a cruise in Hawaii, or a dinner cruise, and the alcohol was included. So I asked her, I said, "Do you mind if I try a Mai Tai? I've never had a Mai Tai. I'd never drinking alcohol ever in my life." And she nodded yes. I didn't give her much option to say no, right? Because it was spur of the moment. But I drank the Mai Tai, and that was very upsetting to her later, she told me. And then in March, I told her I didn't want to pay tithing anymore, and that was very upsetting for her, because now I was going to lose my temple recommend, right? And I was no longer temple worthy. And then it was probably August that I told her I didn't want to wear garments anymore, right? So I'm making changes over the course of a year, but they continue to
Trying
pile
to be
on.
gentle.
Yeah, and I don't know in hindsight if I just ripped the Band-Aid and said, because I knew back in November that I didn't want to do any of those things anymore, but I felt like if I eased into it, it would be easier. But anyway, so September comes around. I came down here to the Valley. I went to a concert. I hung out with my brother-in-law, and we talked, and I kind of formulated a lot of my thoughts and ideas that I wanted to share with my wife, and I called it my thoughts on happiness. And I was just telling her that I'm not willing to sacrifice my happiness anymore for anybody else's happiness. I know me attending church brings her a fair amount of happiness, but it brings me a lot of unhappiness, right? It's now damaging me. It's hurting me to attend church. And so I had a list and documents and paragraphs of different things that I wanted to change, and how it really shouldn't impact her, but I could understand where it might be difficult for her in the beginning. And so I I shared that with her, and the conversation didn't go very well. We kind of started to fight. When I say fight, like me and my wife never yell at each other. We never, like, our fights or discussions, right? Um, but it didn't end well, to the point that she slept in the bed, I slept on the couch that night. And then the
Like a
next
fun
morning,
house.
yeah, right. The next morning was a Sunday morning. She called me back into the bedroom and said, "Can we talk about last night?" We started talking, and concluded. She asked if we could divorce. She asked for a divorce at that point, said that it just wasn't working anymore, that our goals weren't the same in life. And I tried rebutting those. I said, "What do you mean our goals aren't the same in life?" And she said, like, "I want to serve missions when we retire." And I said, "Well, we can. Let's serve for the Peace Corps, or let's serve for Nurses Without Borders, or, there's other organizations outside the church that we can do wonderful and great things with." Um, and it just wasn't getting anywhere, right? It was kind of like her dad trying to console me. I was trying to to justify to her, and it wasn't going anywhere. And so we settled, after a long discussion, we settled on divorce, and said that we were gonna get divorced. And we're both just sobbing, or we're crying, we're having a hard time thinking about what about the kids and this and that. And I felt really bad. She started to blame herself. She said, I'm so sorry for this, I'm so sorry for that." And she blamed the accident, she blamed her mental illness, she blamed depression, she blamed all these. She started taking all the blame on herself. And I said, "No, it's not your fault, it's not your fault, it's not your fault." And she goes, "Yes, it is." I mean, we kind of had that "yes, it is, no, it isn't" back and forth. And finally I said, "There's things about me that you don't know, Maria." And And she goes like, and I didn't mean to say that, or I did mean to say it, but I didn't expect her to pick up on it so fast, or to, say, well, what do you mean, right? And she goes, well, what is it? And through a bunch of tears and a bunch of sobs and a bunch of fear, I came out to her, and I told her that I was gay, that I was attracted to men, and that I had known essentially my entire life, and that I kept it secret because of the pressure from the church and the teachings of the church to eternal life is dependent on you being sealed to a woman, right? And there is no attaining the celestial kingdom, the full exaltation, without being married to a woman, right? And if you're and so her reaction, I honestly, I didn't deserve the grace and the mercy that she gave me in that moment, because for 13 years, right, we suffered in a marriage in many regards. We had a good marriage and we had a happy marriage, but there was a lot of pain also.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure a lot of it stems back to the fact that I wasn't sexually attracted to her, and that I had the secret, and that I had that weight and that burden upon me all this time.
Yes.
And so I feel incredibly bad about that. It's something that I've talked at length with my counselor, and the counselor, something that I like that the counselor said that maybe your audience would appreciate is, they said that there was no successful life modeled for you at a young age where you could see somebody being their true, authentic self in regards to homosexuality and happy, right?
And fully
People
accepted. Yes.
fully accepted. People, like, for me, come out represented losing my family, judgment from friends and neighbors. It represented bringing shame to the family. It represented loss of exaltation. I from the time I was a young boy, I was neck deep in the Boy Scouts of America, right? And I loved it. I attended the National Jamboree twice. I've served as Scoutmaster 3 or 4 times, right? The admission of you're gay, right? Great, in my mind, would at least prohibit me from serving with young men, right? Because they associate homosexuality with pedophilia for some reason.
Yeah, I don't know why that is.
My entire life, would be turned upside down with this admission, right? And that's just the things of this earth, right? Then you throw in exaltation, right? The ability to see your God again depends on you being straight.
Yeah.
And so the counselor told me, she said, that it was never modeled for you, right? You never saw happy, healthy homosexuals that are accepted, that aren't rejected by their family, that aren't talked about behind other people's backs, that aren't the source of jokes, that aren't and so there was no option in my mind for me to come out any sooner than I did. And so that's what you do. You bury it deep, and you try to do everything that you're taught to do. I was given a copy of the Miracle of Forgiveness while on my mission.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. That
And
is the worst document ever created, to make someone feel ashamed about themselves and like there's never any end to all the need to repent.
It really is. It is a terrible book, and I'm glad that it's out of print, and I encourage everybody to take them off their bookshelves and throw them away so that your children.
Yeah, those are books that need to be burned for sure.
But it does. It makes you feel deplorable, just awful, right? And so at a point where I felt like maybe I could have converged and made a different decision, right? I was given that on my mission, right before serving in Venezuela, and so it solidified for me, right, that I'm not gay, right? I suffer with the temptation where I'm attracted to men, but I'm not gay, right? Is what I convinced myself of.
So was this the first time when you were talking to your wife, was this the first time that you actually verbalized that you were gay?
To her, I just months earlier, after another fight, but a discussion, I called a counselor and talked to a counselor and opened up to that counselor. And so that was probably in June, and that's the first soul. No, I guess it was July. It was July 24th, actually, I remember. And so I called him and talked to him. And I hadn't talked to him in years, right? But he was a friend of mine on Facebook, and he's actually affiliated with Natasha, who's in a lot of these groups.
Yeah.
He works for the same organization that she founded or owns. And so I talked to him, and I opened up to him, and I said, like, what do I do? Like, I'm scared that I'm gonna lose everything. And he was very kind. He was very open. He deals with this all the time, but he put me in contact with another Mormon man who was married to a woman and gay and divorced. And so I was able to talk to that person, and he said, you know what, like, until you can accept it yourself, and until you're in a position to love yourself and to kind of let, you know, whatever happens, whatever comes, right? You don't owe anybody an explanation, right? Like, you take your time, don't do anything irrational. And I appreciate that. It bought me a little more time. It allowed me to get more comfortable with the idea of the admission, rather than it just kind of being sprung upon me. And so like I said, that was a Sunday that I came out to her, and another reason why I feel really bad is she was in charge of the primary program that day. She was the one running it, right? And so I unloaded like this bombshell on her just moments before she's expected to sit up at the pulpit, right, and direct all these little kids. And so the timing wasn't great. She and I don't blame her for this, but she told a couple of people at the church, and then she told her family, and so by Tuesday there was more than a dozen people that knew, right? And my heart was panicking, right? Because I hadn't told my family, right? I hadn't told my friends. I had no.
Oh.
And so I got on the bullhorn after that, started calling and coming out to people that were important to me. And then Saturday, October 5th, 2019, I just ripped the Band-Aid and I posted on Facebook and said, Marie and I are getting divorced. I'm gay, and just put it out there. And that was terrifying. It was general conference weekend, so I didn't have to face anybody at church, which was nice. And then the Monday, walking into work and not knowing who knew and who didn't know, and it was really intense. It was hard.
That is. So you are at this space in your life where you've lost your testimony, you've come out, and basically lost your false identity that you were straight. And then now you're risking losing your marriage. So all these foundational things in your life are just crumbling around you.
Yeah, absolutely. It was, like I said, when I said my universe crashed, right? Like I feel like everything was turned upside down. You know, there wasn't any part of my life that wasn't touched by this, right? And
right.
I was afraid for my kids, right? Are my kids going to be teased at school? Again, we're in a conservative community,
Yeah.
in a Mormon community, or even Holbrook, there's quite a few Mormons. People want to call it a Mormon community, but there's a lot. But I was terrified of how they were going to be treated. And even my father-in-law, just when it was the church, right, before he knew that I was gay, when it was just the church, when I told him I can't do this anymore, I'm going to leave the church, he even cautioned me, and he says, just think about what you're doing to your kids. Your kids are going to be, other kids are cruel, and families are cruel, and Mormons aren't very nice to people that leave the church. And he said, just think about what you're doing to your family by you leaving the church, right? And so I had his words echoing just about the church, and then I'm going to throw sexuality on top of it, right?
I know.
And then dealing with the homophobia and all that. And so it was intense, and we sat the kids down and we told them straightforward, right? And I actually used a really cool analogy that I don't know where it came from, but about magnets, right? And that magnets that are properly aligned, right, pull towards each other, and if you turn it around, then they push against each other. And so I explained to them what attraction was, and that's what magnets do. Is if the right people are attracted to each other, and then you pull closer, and if the attraction's not there, they kind of push away. But you can force two magnets together, right? But it's a constant effort. It's a constant pushing.
Right.
And so they seem to understand that. And I was so proud of my third grader. I think it was third grade at the time. He went to school Monday, and at the beginning of class, right, the teacher's trying to get everybody settled down. He raised his hand and waited to be called on, and the teacher called on him, and he goes, "My dad's gay, and my mom and dad are getting divorced." Right? And he just threw it out there. Just
to let you all know.
Yeah, just ripped it.
Here's my life, and y'all gonna have to deal with it.
Yeah, and the teacher emailed me because I worked for the school district, right? And so she had access to me, and she emailed me, she said it was so sweet, and I was so proud of him, and I was glad that he wasn't treating it like either shame or embarrassment. He just owned it, and she said the kids were so nice and kind to him, and
These
many of
kids,
the kids said my parents got divorced and it's okay, right? They were
oh,
consoling. Yeah, it was a tender experience, and so
kids get it more. They are okay with that. I know my kids are far more okay. There's not that level of shame when you and I were very young that
yeah,
it's associated with being gay. It's really just okay.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, um, and unfortunately, though, I still think the Mormon culture is instilling that feeling. I sat in a priesthood lesson. Like I said, at the time that I left the church, I was in the young men's organization, and I sat in a deacon's quorum lesson where the lesson was taught about being called a bigot is akin or synonymous to being called a disciple of Christ in today's days, right?
Oh,
That if you stand up for the true teachings of Jesus Christ, you may be called a bigot for it, and that's okay. You need to get comfortable with that. And my mind was just being blown, right? And I was biting my tongue to the point of bleeding almost, right? Like, um, and it terrified me, the thought of my son, who was going to be in deacon's quorum the very next year, hearing those lessons, and me leaving the church. I wouldn't be there to correct it, right? He would hear that. I wouldn't even know that he heard it,
right.
right? So when I first left the church, I did a lot of things wrong when I left the church, but I told my then wife, I said, I want you and the kids out, right? I want you guys out. Like, read this. And I was pushing information, and I was giving them quotes, and I was talking about Joseph Smith, and I was talking about the Book of Mormon and the Book of Abraham, and I was pushing so much information, trying to get her to see what I had seen, um, and it hurt the relationship for quite a while, right? But that was my motivation. It wasn't to hurt her or to hurt the church or to hurt. It was, I don't want my children hearing these same things that I heard as a kid. For all
Yeah,
I
I'm
know,
being
my
taught that I'm
kids,
inferior.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. To teach that their dad's inferior and that he's not going to heaven, right? It's one thing. But for them, right, they're young. I may have a homosexual child. I don't know. I don't think
Yeah,
so. You don't know, right? My parents didn't think so either, right? And
right.
so um, I don't want them hearing those same awful, terrible things being taught. I don't want the cupcake lesson or the chewing gum lesson for my daughter, that who wants to chew a piece of gum, right? Like, your virtue. I I don't want all those terrible, mean, hurtful things, right? That lots of times I think are unintentional. I don't think the church means
I
always for it,
agree.
but the kids that are harboring a secret, because my little brother's only 14 months apart from me, right? So we were in deacon's quorum together, we were in teacher's quorum together, and we were in priest quorum. And so I would tell him things that were said in those lessons. He goes, I don't remember that. I said, yeah, but you weren't hiding a secret, right? Like,
Exactly.
you weren't the little boy attracted to other little boys, hiding the secret that you're this awful, vile, disgusting person, right?
Right.
Like, of course those things just rolled right off your back,
Well,
right?
and same for the
But
girls.
yeah,
You're being taught about the chewing gum and the poop and the brownies lesson, or however creative we are about losing your virtue. And they didn't affect me much at all, because there was nothing going on in my life that would trigger that. But in every room, there's at least, of every room of 10 girls, there's at least 3 that are at home getting sexually molested, and you're just told
yeah,
them that they're sullied in some way. And so,
yeah.
yeah, it absolutely affects them.
And like I said, I think it's unintentional, but it's very real, right? And it's and
It's,
it's a and it's a lack of training, right? I think the church curriculum probably needs to do better about training the adults on what to say and what not to say, and the young impressionable children that they have access to on a regular basis. And I held mine to the highest esteem, right? My deacon's quorum advisor was the guy who took me through the temple, right? When you could choose anybody to be your escort, the person that you look up to the most, it was him, right?
yeah,
And he was my seminary teacher, and he was, you know, I held him to high esteem and high regard. And I'm not, and hopefully if he sees this, because he watches a lot of stuff on my Facebook, but I'm not saying that he said anything, right? But again, what I am saying is these leaders are held to a high standard for these little kids. I remember that when I was younger, when I was getting baptized, they said, because my dad wasn't active, and they said, well, who's somebody you look up to, right? And at 8 years old, I chose the tallest person I knew, right? Because I looked up to him, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. But by 12 years old, right, that changes, right? And you do look up to these people for very specific reasons, and they were my father figures, right? My dad's a phenomenal dad, right? I'm not discrediting him at all, but he wasn't active, right? And there was always that pressure, like, I want an eternal family. I want my family to go to the temple. I put so much pressure on my parents, right, to be active
Right.
that it hurt them in the process.
So you were a child that was being raised to believe that your father was somehow inferior because he was inactive. And as a father, knowing that you want to have influence on your kids and you want them to learn good principles to be loving citizens of the world, you did not want your kids to feel this, my dad is inferior because he's gay. And
Yeah,
so it's the same beliefs that actually destroy families, and all in the name of we're helping families and we're making families stronger, not realizing that at the core you're actually planting seeds that destroy families. I mean, every young boy at that age, who do you look up to, should say my dad, not
absolutely.
because he's not a member of the church, that shouldn't affect it, or he's gay, that shouldn't affect it. It's the quality of the person and the dedication and devotion they have to my life. It's my dad, without question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I sadly and regrettably didn't feel that way about my dad. My dad was unworthy of exercising the priesthood,
Oh,
right? And so for me, there's the homosexuality, but there's also the fact that I'm not a righteous priesthood holder any longer, right? That I've
right.
officially resigned from the church, um, and so I don't want my son, who's now a deacon, being taught that he's somehow superior to me for this power that he supposedly has that I don't, right? And I feel like with my maturity now, I'm handling it different. I'm not I'm not sitting him down and saying you're no better than me, right?
Right.
Um,
That's
but
fair.
yeah, but I very much was that 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 14-year-old in regards to my father, right? I very much thought that I was superior to him in many ways for a long time.
Well, and now we have the privilege to teach our children that the character of a person is based on, you know, their principles and their values and what they do for others, and the fact that you contribute your life force energy to provide for your family and to teach them correct principles. That's like, none of that even matters. What the only thing that matters is that you are a straight priesthood holder who is who is obedient to the church.
Yeah,
If you aren't doing any of this other stuff, it wouldn't matter. But if you're living like this, which kind of incorporates some of this, but that's all that matters. And that to me is a very um, a terrible measuring stick. And I was going to say before that in something as enlightened as a Christ-like perspective, where Christ came to the planet and was introducing radical ideas about love, how come the church is always on the wrong end of history when it comes into inclusion and love? That was one of the big questions that I had. I mean, it just seems like they should be at this radical place of how to teach us to love better. And then when I saw all the seeds and all the contention, all the reasons to criticize and to judge, that's when I was like, this something is not right.
yeah,
So Jake, oh, thanks for sharing that story. That is so, I can just feel it. Tears come to my eyes because of that moment when you must have told your wife not only this, but I am gay too. I mean, that is so much to carry inside of you. Bless. What is it that's helped you today? What are the things that you started to realize and practice that have helped you heal that tremendous wound?
well, and originally when I reached out to you, one of the things that I talked about was the internalized homophobia, right? And that
Yeah.
I still carry, even though I feel like I'm much more true and authentic to myself, I still have 35 years of ingrained teachings, that miracle forgiveness type teaching, right? The pressure that I placed on myself, and the self-loathing, right? And so just processing that has been incredibly difficult. somebody else who I think is affiliated with your group, and I know you know her, is Elena Thurston, right, with the Pride and Joy Foundation.
Sure, absolutely.
She does, she teaches about the mental boardroom, right? And it could apply in many different areas, right? If you have anger issues, or if you have appetite issues or whatever, right? But for me, it was the internalized homophobia. And so I did this meditation with a close friend, and I basically called all the different parts of my personality into the room, right? And I kind of addressed the homophobia, and it's still a work in progress. If you go to Elena's website, the Pride and Joy Foundation, I wrote an article for her, and people can read it there. I won't go into too much detail, but just recognizing that person in my head is there because somebody else put them there, right? An organization put them there, and it's not me. And just working through those feelings. And so my counselor, one of the things that she did that really helped me, she was the one who identified internalized homophobia. I'd never even heard the phrase, right? Um, and for those who don't know, I'm not homophobic towards other people, right? I'm actually quite envious of other people, right? That are true and
Yeah, who can
authentic.
do it without shame.
Yeah. The internal factors that I feel those terrible homophobic things about myself, right? And so that's the difference between internal and external homophobia. But the counselor, something that she helped me is, she goes, think back, kind of when you felt like you were pushed furthest in the closet. Like when was it that you realized what you were doing was wrong in the church's terms, right? When did you feel the most shame? And I identified probably like 13, 14 years old, is kind of that point, 7th, 8th, 9th grade, when you're hitting puberty and maturity and all of that. And she goes, look back at that 13-year-old Jake, look at him, picture him, look at him, see him in your mind. How do you feel about him? What would you say? And in my feelings, I felt an incredible amount of empathy and compassion. And I just want to give him a hug, right? I just want to tell him, like, it's okay and it gets better, right? She said that if you could have those feelings for 12-year-old you, why not 35-year-old you, right? Why not 36-year-old you?
Yeah.
And so just have that empathy, have that compassion, right? And so that's a daily thing, right? That I have to give myself grace. I have to give myself that compassion. I would also say something that I picked up from you at that conference, is looking at my past and not feeling too much remorse or regret, right? Kind of like you give the analogy of the dragonfly, right? And the dragonflies that choose to fly can't look back at the ones in the water and say, you guys are stupid for staying down there. You can't disparage those that choose to stay in the water, and you can't disparage those in the water, can't disparage those that choose to fly, right?
Right.
Well, the one and the same, right? Me in the water, I represent as the Mormon me, right? I can't look back and regret those years and those experiences too harshly, right? There's plenty of things, like I said, that I do regret, and that I do still harbor anger towards, but I'm working on those things. And
It's a process. Yeah.
yeah, and there was so much good that came out of the church too, right? And so taking the good, kind of like you talked about this generation of kids, right? They're being raised by parents that are a little bit better than the generation behind them, and a little bit better than.
Yes.
You take the good and you weed out the bad, right? And so that's what I'm doing, and that's what I'm hopefully instilling with the kids. I just told my son, before he was being interviewed to become a deacon, I said, you're going to hear some catchphrases, right? There's going to be talk about your worthiness. There's going to be talk about repentance. I said, you don't owe anybody any explanation of your worthiness. Your worthiness is yours and yours alone, right? Like
Yes.
nothing you do or can do will ever diminish your worthiness in my eyes, in God's eyes, in anybody's eyes, right? And so taking the good, like I understand the interviews to a certain extent have to happen, right? Because that's the culture of the church and that's how they do it. I don't think it has to. I think they can change radically, but again, right now it is the church, and I've agreed to raise the kids in the church. But I'm certainly going to be nuanced with them, right? I'm going to teach them to distinguish between right and wrong, even within the church. And so, that's another thing, is just looking at my past, right, and accepting the good for what there was, and just accepting the negative as best I can. And then probably the last thing is just move forward, right? Like I'm I'm still trying to figure out who I am. That's why I quit my job. That's why I sold my house. That's why I sold my car. That's why I bought a van. It's why I'm vacationing or traveling. I kind of grew up in a bubble, I feel.
Yeah.
So I want to go and experience and see more. I want to hear stories. I want to tell stories. I want to see things. And like bartending was never on the table, right? If you look at career aspirations of a young Mormon boy, right? Bartending was never on the table. I'm not saying I'm going to bartend, but who's to say I can't if I don't want, right? Like,
right. Maybe I don't want to mix sugar with sugar. You actually want to do it with alcohol and other things.
yeah. And so that's what this year, I'm calling it a sabbatical, but really it's unemployment, living off savings is what it is. But I'm taking a year and just kind of figure out who I am and what I am, and continue working on being the best me that I can be.
So Jake, that's what I think is so beautiful about your story is you're willing. I mean, you've pretty much lost it all. So what else do you have to lose, And so you're going into this exploration with your van and your kids. In Stephen Hassan's book, The Freedom of Mind, how he was kind of indoctrinated into the Moonies at the age of 20. His book is excellent for people who are leaving a high demand religion like you and I have. But part of the book, it left me wanting more, because he explains on how to connect with yourself and reestablish your identity. And he says, go back to the time before you before you joined that church. And what are the things that you loved and what are the things that you did? And I said, but I don't know who I am without the church, because I was born into that bubble. I was born into that environment. And so I'm not quite sure who I am without the layers of indoctrination. And so your journey in this van going around, having these, experiences and these adventures is what I see it as part of you getting to know who am I? What do I love? What lights me up? So that you can move in the direction of what brings you joy at an intuitive and authentic level, not trying to map onto somebody else's program, trying to fit into their narrow cracks to try and find joy that was just never there for you. It just wasn't your path. So I commend you on that. That is amazing. So is there anything else you would like to share for those of us who are trying to move on and trying to unpack the resentment, the anger, the emotions, and all of those things? What else would you say to those with your experience being so unique and so diverse? What would you say?
Like I said, I know that I made a lot of mistakes along the way, right?
Will do.
No
one leaves gracefully.
Right. I would tell people that are struggling and that they're awakening and they're looking to leave the church, or they're discovering things that they hadn't read. Well, first, trust your own intuition, trust your judgment. Don't that cognitive dissonance exists for a reason, right? It's telling you that there's two conflicting things, right? And honestly, the more simple answers is oftentimes the correct answer, right? There's so much mental gymnastics that occurs in trying to make the church's truth claims work.
Yeah.
Where honestly, it made a lot more sense for me to say that it was made up, right? And I feel like Joseph Smith started out well-intentioned. I really do. He was trying to marry the ideas from a Universalist father and a Methodist mother, right? And he had the loss of his brother and had to justify, his brother in hell or his brother saved, right? And he's got conflicting thoughts from parents. I think he was well-intentioned in the beginning. I think lots of people that get a little bit of power and a little bit of control and money, it quickly goes south if you don't keep yourself in check. And I think that's kind of what happened. And then Brigham Young somehow recovered it and ran with it, right? But I would say those that are struggling, find your inner voice. And it's, in my mind, it's not the spirit, but you can still associate it with the spirit if you'd like. But trust your inner voice, trust yourself. Take your time, right? Because
there's no rush.
You've been in this church your entire life, right? Try to prove it right if you'd like, right? But don't read just the materials that they provide you in that pursuit to prove it right. actually open yourself up to reading other sources. Because one of the things that I did when it was, I called my friend who's a non-member, who's my best friend, and I called him up. He lives in Indiana, and I said, Rodney, like, do Mormons look as crazy as I feel right now? Like, we believe such a crazy, nonsensical story when you look at it from an outsider's perspective. I said, did you think I was just crazy all these years? And he was funny. He goes, do you know what? Mormons are only important to Mormons. He goes, the rest of the world really doesn't pay attention to what you're doing.
No one else really cares.
You guys are the center of your own universe, but there's a whole nother universe, right? Like,
It's so true.
so it made me feel better that he wasn't looking at me over the last 12 years and saying, man, this guy's so brainwashed. So and really I was, and I but again, there was no other option modeled, right? Like, you're just, like you said, you're raised in it. Like, I have to give myself a lot of grace and a lot of forgiveness for believing the things I did, for the things I said, for the way I acted, for the whatever, right? So that'd be my advice, is probably just take it slow.
Yeah.
Try to prove it right if that helps you, but use sources outside of the church, because it's all there. It's so easy to access.
And you can weigh and measure it. You have the mental capacity to, and the reasoning already born within you to weigh and measure on your own. You don't have to be afraid of outside information. You know what? This is one thing that I say for people who are leaving and they want to leave the perfect way, because they think that there's one perfect, graceful way that's not going to hurt anybody's feelings and all this. And I said, there is one way to leave, and it's the right way, and it's your way. Whatever feels right for you, and whatever mistakes that you perform along the way, you're going to learn from those too. And so there's never any wrong way to leave the church. And even whatever we leave in our wake, as we pick it up and we heal, it's going to help us. But I love your suggestion to trust your right to question, trust your intuition, and believe that you have the right to differentiate and grow beyond your family paradigm, because so much more out there.
You made me think of two other things, and I know we're probably
share.
But two of my mantras through it, right? One was, it doesn't have to make sense to anybody but us, right? And me and my ex-wife would repeat that over and over and over again, because she was challenged by people who loved and cared for her. Like, why haven't you kicked him out of the house? Why he's still living with you, right? We lived together all the way up until the divorce, right? Which was, I don't know, 7 months after I came out to her, right? And so we continued to live together. When I'm not traveling, I live with her right now, right? And people question, our approach and why we did things. And it doesn't have to make sense to anybody but those that you care about, right? Like, and so for me and my ex-wife at the time, right, and now she's my co-parent, right? We're still gonna raise these kids. Nothing has to make sense to anybody but us, right? That's it. And then what's the other one? I don't remember what the other one was, but there was another mantra that you had made me think of while you were talking, but I don't remember what it was.
And what I like about that is that you actually become the sovereign authority of your own life, and that you're not living by some policy manual that's in behind a bishop's desk and trying to live according to what the church expects of you, that you can actually go inward and say, you know what? This is what works for our family. This is what's most healthy for our family. This is the path we're going to choose. And everybody else, it's none of really your business. I don't have to answer to anyone.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's empowering. Jake, thank you so much for your story. It's so inspirational. I wish you the best on your journey. I would really like to catch back up with you after your year in the van.
Yeah.
But I enjoy your Facebook page and watching your pictures and seeing you with your kids. And I'm sure you're as excited for your future and even more than I am. So
I definitely am. And a plug for you, right? Those people listening, like I said, that conference in February really was life-changing. It was the first time that I had ever attended anything like it, right? The speakers were incredible. But honestly, your session was phenomenal, right? And it was thought-provoking and got me thinking. And so I guess the last piece of advice for people is don't do it alone, right? There are people like Wendi. There are groups, there's Facebook groups, there's subreddit groups. There's such a huge community of very smart, well-rounded happy people who've left the church, and so don't do it alone.
I agree with that, Jake, and thank you for your kind words. And I would absolutely agree with you that the unity that we had in the church is to be found outside the church in a unique way that people who leave other religions really don't have what we have. And so I like to include them in and say, we get you, we understand you, and we have a great organization of people who are outside, and you can live a happy, joyful, productive, contributive life outside of the church.
Yeah. I thought I was the only gay man leaving the church, right?
Oh, see,
You feel like you're on an island, right? Like clearly nobody's ever been this dumb, right, to make this decision to get married, And then I come out on October 5th.
There's a whole bunch of them.
Within 2 days, I'm connected on a group with like 380 others, right?
Yes. And
There's so many people.
awesome. They're awesome. I love gay men who have left the church. They're just, because they've had to harbor so much and become okay with themselves, they're so accepting and so loving of other people. And so they're my favorite. So.
Well, thanks for having me, Wendi. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And you take care.
All right. Thanks.